The national team was once more than just a jersey. It was an oath, a sacred space where mistakes were forgiven, but betrayal was never forgotten. In the decades when stadiums shook and names became myths, some players suddenly vanished from this space without a farewell, without explanation, without official truth. No final appearance, no testimonial match, just silence and an empty spot in the squad. Files were closed, questions remained unanswered, and time did its part to obscure everything. Yet the shadows of these decisions are still palpable today. These are 7 legends who were banned from the national team because of a secret that was never fully solved. And now the story begins with the first name. Top 1, Alfredo Di Stefano. Alfredo Di Stefano wasn't just a player, he was a system. Nearly 400 goals for Real Madrid, 5 European Cups in a row, a player who was simultaneously a finisher, playmaker, and tempo setter. While others filled positions, he controlled the entire space between the lines, directing pace and direction as if he had calculated the game's flow seconds in advance. At the club level, he became the undisputed center of a dynasty, but at the national team level, a story full of breaks and inconsistencies began. Call-ups that were withdrawn, federations that contradicted each other, tournaments where his name was missing without any clear explanation ever following. Di Stefano wore different jerseys, but none led him to the biggest stage of his time, and eventually he completely disappeared from the national context. What makes this decision so hard to comprehend lies in the way Di Stefano played. Analyses with today's tracking data show running paths and positional changes that were far ahead of their time, a game intelligence that shattered existing systems. That was precisely the problem. A player who couldn't be pigeonholed, who challenged hierarchies, became a risk for a national team that relied on strict control. Conversations behind closed doors, tensions that were never documented, and finally silence. No ban, no official break, just the slow, definitive disappearance from the squad. Today, his name stands in museums, his images loop endlessly across screens, his figure seems carved in stone. But behind this monument remains a void that has not been filled to this day. Alfredo Di Stefano was not removed from the national team because he was too weak, but because he was too great to be made to conform. Top 2, Eric Cantona. Eric Cantona was never just a striker for the French national team. He was a disruptive factor in the best and most dangerous sense. Goals in crucial moments, a presence that turned games around, a player who demanded the ball when others hit it. In a generation searching for a new identity, Cantona became a central figure, the loudest expression of both talent and defiance. But then came the break, abrupt and definitive. No gradual demotion, no quiet farewell, but a sudden disappearance from the Équipe de France jersey. Officially, there was talk of discipline, incompatibility, of order that had to be maintained. Unofficially, everything remained vague, and therein lies the unsolved mystery. Cantona played with an intensity that couldn't be squeezed into systems. His movements seemed unpredictable. His decisions came earlier than defenders' reactions. His game lived on instinct rather than directives. Modern analyses show a player who constantly broke the rhythm, who deliberately stepped out of structure to open spaces others didn't even perceive. For the club, this became a weapon. For the national team, a threat. A collective that sought control met a player who rejected control. Conversations were held, positions hardened, and eventually a decision was made that was never fully explained. Cantona wasn't injured, wasn't out of form, wasn't superfluous. He was inconvenient. Today, he appears in interviews and art projects, on stages, far from the pitch, but always with the same demeanor. For him, the French national team only exists as a chapter that was abruptly closed. Eric Cantona was not banned because he broke the rules, but because he refused to live by them. Top 3, George Best. George Best was every defense's nightmare and simultaneously the face of an entire era. European Cup winner, Ballon d'Or recipient, the man who led Manchester United to a new dimension and suddenly made soccer look like rock and roll. On the field, he moved with a lightness that was almost impossible to grasp, dribbling through tight spaces as if there were no opponents, only open doors. For Northern Ireland, he meant hope, identity, and international visibility. And yet his relationship with the national team became increasingly fragile until it finally broke. Nominations became rarer, discussions grew louder, and eventually his name no longer appeared on the match report without any clear cut ever being explained. The incomprehensible aspect of best play lay in his ability to manipulate time. He slowed the moment when others became frantic, sped it up when order was established. Analyses show a player who defeated defenders not just technically, but mentally because he made decisions before they even formed. Exactly that made him unpredictable. For a national team that needed clear processes, he became a risk, a variable that couldn't be controlled. Between expectations, internal tensions, and the attempt to maintain control, something was lost that was never repaired. There was no official ban, no public judgment, just the slow removal of an exceptional talent from the team's core. Today, George Best lives on in images, in quotes, in stories that sound like legends because they are barely explainable. His name appears on banners, in stadiums, in the memory of a generation that has never forgotten him. George Best did not disappear from the national team because he betrayed soccer, but because soccer could not find a place to fully contain him. Top 4. Johan Cruyff. Johan Cruyff was the brain of a game far ahead of its time. European champion, three-time World Player of the Year, architect of total football, a player who not only passed the ball, but created spaces before they even existed. For the Dutch national team, he was the tempo setter, the focal point, and an extension of the coaching staff on the field. Every movement had meaning. Every touch of the ball altered the game's dynamics. And yet his name is missing where it was expected, at the 1978 World Cup. No farewell, no injury report, no clear explanation, just a void that still raises questions today. What made Cruyff so exceptional was his ability to read the game as if viewing it from the outside. His positional changes didn't follow a line, but an internal logic that pulled defenses apart without directly attacking them. Modern analyses show that Cruyff constantly manipulated opponents' decision-making processes, forcing them to set wrong priorities. Exactly this dominance made him unassailable, and at the same time dangerous for a system that wanted to prioritize control above all else. Behind the scenes, tensions escalated, conversations remained internal, and in the end, a decision was made that was never fully disclosed. Cruyff stayed away, and with him, the mind behind an entire idea disappeared. Today, Johan Cruyff lives on in concepts, academies, and ways of thinking that bear his name. His influence is visible everywhere, but his absence from 1978 remains a dark spot in the history of Dutch football. Johan Cruyff was not excluded because he was missing, but because his absence spoke volumes. Top 5. Franz Beckenbauer. Franz Beckenbauer embodied authority even before he spoke a word. World champion as a player, world champion as a captain, the man who redefined the libero role and controlled the game from deep as if it were a chessboard. For the German national team, he was not just a leader but an organizational system, someone who provided structure where chaos threatened. Yet, even with a figure of this magnitude, a break occurred, quietly, internally, barely perceptible to the public. After the triumph of 1974, a phase began where his relationship with the national team seemed increasingly distant, until he was eventually no longer part of the squad, without any clear, final word ever being spoken about it. Beckenbauer's game thrived on anticipation. He intervened not when things got loud, but when it was necessary. His running paths seem minimalistic, yet modern analyses show a permanent control of the most dangerous zones, a reading of the game situation seconds before the actual attack. Exactly this self-assurance brought him into a position where boundaries blurred. A player who knew more than many decision-makers, who not only bore responsibility but defined it, was increasingly perceived behind closed doors as too powerful. Discussions about influence, roles, and control remained internal. Decisions were executed rather than explained. Beckenbauer wasn't injured, wasn't out of form, wasn't replaceable, and yet he was no longer there. Today, his image appears in documentaries, tributes, and historical retrospectives, always with a calm, almost distant demeanor. His legacy is clear, but the manner of his departure from the national team is not. Franz Beckenbauer was not pushed out of the system because he disrupted it, but because he himself had become the system. Top 6. Ferenc Puskás. Ferenc Puskás was the epitome of efficiency, a left foot that decided games before they could even turn. Olympic champion, captain of the Hungarian national team, the heart of the Golden Team, a squad that not only beat opponents but humiliated them. Goals came in streaks, combinations seemed rehearsed yet improvised, and Puskás was always where the ball needed to end up. Hungary was unbeatable with him until the flow abruptly dried up. After 1956, he never returned, no farewell, no official retirement, just a void covered with political platitudes and vague explanations. The national team continued to play, but without its voice, without its focal point. The disturbing aspect of Puskás's game lay in its radicalism. He didn't need speed or athletic dominance, but just a fraction of a second in an open angle. Analyses by today's standards show finishing angles and decision times that even modern strikers rarely achieve. Precisely this clarity made him irreplaceable, and at the same time unbearable in an era where control was understood not just sportingly, but politically. Decisions were made off the field, bans were issued, paths separated, without any sporting justification ever being provided. Puskás wasn't injured, wasn't at the end of his career, wasn't dispensable, he was undesirable. Today, a stadium bears his name, his image hangs in halls of fame, and his goals are displayed like relics. But in the history of the Hungarian national team, a rift remains that was never closed. Ferenc Puskás did not disappear because he failed, but because his freedom did not fit into the system that had once celebrated him. Top 7. Michel Platini. Michel Platini was precision in human form. European champion, 3-time World Player of the Year. The man who didn't dominate games but controlled them as if he designed every scene beforehand. For the French national team, he was simultaneously director, focal point, and moral authority. Goals from midfield, free kicks with surgical precision, decisions that were always one step ahead. And yet, his time in the Équipe tricolore jersey didn't end with a grand finale, but with a quiet retreat, accompanied by hints, tensions, and unanswered questions. Platini played at a speed that wasn't measurable. It wasn't his legs that were fast, but his mind. Modern analyses show a player who opened passing angles before they existed, who forced defenders to make wrong decisions even before the ball left his foot. Precisely this dominance shifted power dynamics. A player who had weight not only on the field, but also in discussions became increasingly inconvenient for an environment that demanded clear roles. Decisions were made internally, conversations remained behind closed doors, and eventually Platini was no longer part of the team, without a break being publicly named. No scandal, no official ban, just the end of an era that felt like an abrupt halt. Today, his name appears in debates, committees, and retrospectives. His image remains closely linked to a golden generation, but the final chapter of his national team career still feels incomplete, like a movie without a final scene. Michel Platini did not leave the national team because his effectiveness waned, but because his presence had become too grand to be contained. They played in an era where decisions were final and silence weighed heavier than any judgment. These 7 stories show that greatness in soccer doesn't always end with a clean farewell. Some careers break not on the pitch, but in the shadow of power. If this truth has resonated with you, support this video with a like, subscribe for more stories from a different football era, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Some legends only begin where everything else ends.